All right, once again, welcome to this month's Wildlife for Lunch webinar. It's going to be on wildlife photography presented by Russell Graves. This month's webinar is made possible through funding provided by the San Antonio Livestock Exposition Incorporated, and is hosted by the Texas Wildlife Association and Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. Russell, I'll pass the controls over to you, and you're good to go.
Perfect, thanks. First of all, I want to say thanks to everyone for listening in. This is a little different format than I'm used to. Most of the time I'm used to standing up and speaking in front of a bunch of people. So I'm going to get going, and Tom Mayer says he's not hearing anything, by the way. So I'm going to get going and talk about wildlife photography and maybe some ways that you can improve your game, and be happy to entertain any questions. Now, Clint, do you want me to answer questions as we go along, or how do we want to handle the questions?
I'll just write them down and then relay them to you at the end of the program. That way it's a seamless presentation through.
Okay, so I'll just go ahead and get started.
Sounds great.
All right, first thing I want to do is introduce myself. My name is Russell A. Graves, and I actually work out of two places in Texas, Dodge City, Texas, which is a small town in northeast Texas, close to Bonham, between Harris and Sherman. Grew up there. I'm a landowner there and have a house there, but I primarily live in Childress, Texas, which is further upriver from Dodge City, and it's in the northwest corner or southeast corner of the Texas Panhandle. A little bit about me: I'm a commercial and editorial photographer, and what commercial means is a lot of times you may see my pictures, but you don't know that it's me that took them because they don't put credits by that. I shoot a lot of ad campaigns for various companies in the outdoors as well as the agriculture industries, and also have worked with a lot of celebrities over the past couple of years. Also an editorial photographer, and that's maybe where some of y'all may recognize my name. I shoot an awful lot for magazines here in Texas and all over the country. I primarily concentrate on Texas because Texas is where I'm from and Texas is what I love, so I've always tried to position myself in the marketplace as a Texas guy. I do quite a bit for Texas Wildlife magazine, both photograph and write, so you may have seen my stuff in that magazine as recently, I think, as last month in the October issue. Like I said, I'm a magazine writer, and I've written a few books on various subjects. Primarily, my focus is in the outdoors, agriculture, and travel industries, and I've been doing this for a long time. One of the things when people meet me, they'll always say that I'm a lot younger than they thought I was because I've been doing it for so long. But in 1989, I was 19 years old, and that's when I had my first pictures published in the magazine and got paid for it. And I realized that it's a great country when you can take pictures and they appear in a magazine and someone will actually send you a check for it. So I've been doing it for quite a long time and love the business, love writing about Texas wildlife and photographing Texas wildlife and everything therein. And recently, I've kind of evolved my business a little bit. I've been involved in some TV production and interactive media production, some iBooks, work with a lot of corporate clients on, kind of building videos for their web presence and for internal use for corporations. So really kind of do a lot of things, but my passion and when I started photography was all about wildlife photography. I always try to keep things pretty simple. For 16 years, I was an ag teacher in the Texas public school system. I was an agri-science teacher in Childress, and that's actually why I came here, because in the summer of 1993, when I was graduating college, I was engaged to be married, and my dad told me that don't plan on getting married unless you have a job and you can support your wife if it's her choice to stay at home and take care of the kids when y'all have kids. And so Childress said the magic words, you're hired, and I moved out here then, and that was 21 years and 2 babies ago. So I've made this my home. Love it out here. I live out in the country, and there's wildlife all around us. Any given day, we'll have wild turkeys, we'll have wild pigs, white-tailed deer, all kinds of horny toads, all kinds of critters just hanging out in the yard of our house. And so what I try to do with my background in teaching, I always try to keep things simple. So today's program is called 5 Tips to Make Yourself a Better Photographer, and I'm going to keep it really succinct. The hard thing about giving presentations is, especially like this where it's anonymous, is you're never sure, for example, one person may be really, really advanced, and another person may be getting started. So this is going to be kind of generic. Towards the end, if you have any specific questions on technical questions, I'd be happy to answer those. But tip number one is watch what everybody else is doing and then do something different. And I say that because I've been on trips with guys before, other friends of mine who like taking pictures, and we'll travel somewhere. You know, one of the places I love going because it's easy to take pictures and there's lots of wildlife there is Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge. And I allude to that place because one thing I was showing him there is when you go there, you may see 40 or 50 or 60 other photographers shooting pictures of waterfowl at this wildlife refuge over in New Mexico. And again, it's a great place. There's thousands of geese and cranes and ducks, and you see all kinds of stuff, and it's really easy to go there and take pictures. But one of the things that people do while they're there is everybody stands with their cameras at the same angle in the same spot, and everybody essentially takes the same picture of everything. So one thing I encourage people to do, especially with digital now, you know, back in the day when I shot film, I could tell you that it cost $12 for every roll of film, to buy the roll of film and have it processed. It cost $12 per roll to take those pictures, so it got pretty pricey. Well, fast forward to, I don't know, 2004, 2005, something like that, when digital photography got really good and everyone started making the switch to digital. Now there's no consideration in terms of how much it costs to take up media in your camera, because, you know, theoretically, if you've got enough memory cards, the sky's the limit. So one of the things I always encourage people to do is try to take a look at what everybody else is doing and then do something different. Try a different angle. Try to find animals doing some kind of different behavior, like these four pintails. They look like synchronized swimmers that are all head down, butts in the air, trying to feed in that pond. Another thing I do is try to get different angles. You know, those people I alluded to at the wildlife refuge, they're all standing with their tripods fully extended, shooting down on the animals. One thing I always try to do is get at eye level with the animals, even if we're talking about little bitty animals like this killdeer, where the benefit of doing something different and maybe trying to change your angle is the fact that you get these really cool reflections if you get a low angle like you see in this picture. And I also like to try to include animals when I can in different places. I always thought this shot was really neat because I actually found a bunch of turkeys roosted on the county road on these highline wires, and it amazed me that this tom, even before the sun came up, how this tom was strutting on a highline wire trying to impress that hen. And she flew down a couple of minutes after that, so I don't know that she was all that impressed. And then the number two tip I give people all the time is keep a creative edge. You know, I take literally tens of thousands of pictures every year, and you know, it gets to be a job. I mean, as much fun as it is, and as satisfying a work as it is, it still gets to be a job. And so creatively, you start to bog down a little bit. You're not as sharp as you were. You're not seeing things in a new way. And so I always try to think about how I can keep a creative edge. And one of the things I do is I read lots of magazines. You know, in order to stay creative, I read lots of magazines, not just photography magazines, but all kinds of magazines. Texas Wildlife, Texas Parks and Wildlife. I read, you know, Texas Monthly is another one I look at, even though they don't have much wildlife content. I'll look at magazines that are outside of the wildlife genre just to try to see what other photographers are doing. You know, I've got 2 or 3 wedding photographers. I never aspire to be a wedding photographer, but the guys that do it and do it really, really well at the high end, they're really artistic in the way they approach things. So I'll even pay attention to what those guys are doing to try to figure out ways that I can be more creative in my craft. You know, like I just said, I follow others' works, you know, whether it's Lyman Menzer, who I've been following. I wrote that, and Grady Allen. Back when I first got started in the late 80s, I wrote those guys letters that I still have today, asking them for advice on getting started. So I've always tried to follow others' works, not trying to emulate what they're doing, just trying to be inspired from what they do. And then I get the input of others. You know, I'm not as diligent as I should be on it, but one of the ways I get the inputs of others is, you know, I'll share pictures on, I used to do a lot of forums, but Facebook, Twitter, things like that. And, you know, Texans are nice. If I take a picture, most of the time someone won't tell me how bad the picture is. But if I get a lack of comments, I kind of know, especially if I'm trying a new technique or a new angle. So I try to get the input of others. And this is a key thing. And it sounds counterintuitive, but it really works. One of the things I do a lot is I'll just put my camera away for a while. You know, typically coming through hunting season, since I do a lot for hunting magazines and a lot in the outdoors, hunting seasons typically from about September through December is usually really, really, really busy for me. By January, I'm getting kind of tired of being out and being cold all the time and being uncomfortable all the time. And so come February, I usually just try to put the camera away for a long time and just not even pick it up, not even really try to think about photography. And I found for me, when I put the camera away for a while, when I pick it back up, it's like a brand new toy for me. And it's really, I kind of feel like I do better creatively. So that's my second tip is just to stay creative. And, you know, when you kind of put all those things together, you start thinking of new ways to shoot pictures. Like I'd never thought about this before, but one of the perks of living in Childress is, and I guess living most anywhere in Texas, is we have a lot of wild pigs all over the state, and we have particularly a lot of wild pigs here. And I've gotten, you know, in places I try to work and photograph, I've gotten where I'll bait animals a lot, especially wild pigs, to try to get pictures of them. And you know, I was used to taking that same picture over and over again, you know, sitting in the blind, having a pig 20 yards away, shooting kind of an eye-level shot, which is a great shot to get. But, you know, I start thinking, can I do something different? And what I ended up doing here was I put the corn on the ground. I went ahead and pre-baited the spot, put the corn on the ground knowing the pigs were going to show up. And I actually put the camera, dug a little hole and put the camera down in a hole and used the remote control to fire it. So when the pig walked up and started feeding, all I had to do then was just press the button to be able to shoot pictures at this really, really low angle. Shooting up, it really, to me, is a dramatic sky and really made a dynamic photograph. You know, another shot I think that just has a lot of creativity to it is I was in Colorado and saw these, was trying to photograph these elk. And I kept hearing one bugling, but I couldn't spot it. And I finally spotted it. He was laying down in the grass. And he's a big bull elk, and I guess he was so dominant on that pasture that he didn't have to get up to scare the other ones off. So I finally spotted him. And to me, of all the elk pictures I've ever taken before, this is one of my favorite, of just his antlers sticking out of the grass like that. I mentioned Bosque del Apache before. This is Bosque del Apache. You know, one of the things that I saw people doing one year when they're doing the same thing as everybody else is they're on one spot of the refuge and they're taking pictures of just these individual geese or sandhill cranes flying in. And, you know, I'm sure they're getting nice shots, but they're all but ignoring the giant blast off that would happen every day when these geese would leave the field after feeding to go back to water. And so one day I set up and just wanted to see the spectacle. I actually had a couple of cameras set up. I had one set up with my remote control on a tripod next to me to be able to get two different angles. And I had one that I was actually looking through. So I had a wide angle that I could control remotely with a remote, and then I had the telephoto lens on one camera that I was looking through, so I could actually pick out and focus. And this is what 10,000 geese looks like when you zoom in on them, blasting off all at one time. And again, love waterfowl, love all kinds of ducks, and to me, this is one of my favorite shots of pintails too. I love the one with the fours, where the four rear ends are sticking in the air. But this one right here, just the action of the water being splashed up by his feet, his tail pointing straight in the air. Just to me, the composition, the way I composed the picture, everything from a behavior standpoint, and trying to illustrate excuse me. Trying to illustrate a behavior in a wildlife species, really, this kind of all came together for me, I think. And I tell people too, and this isn't one of my tips, but as far as a way of maintaining creativity, you know, think of the mundane you see in the natural world every day, like these turkey tracks, and think of a way you can kind of present them in a different way. And for me, it was using the real shallow depth of field and kind of shooting at an angle and composing it in a way where the tracks are kind of leading into the image, because you can see the one track that's in the foreground, that's in most of it's in focus. The front edge of it's kind of soft, and that was on purpose. And then in the background, you can see the out of focus track. And really, instead of just doing a static track, looking straight down on it, taking a picture, which is a fine way to take it, but I was just trying to do something a little bit different. Again, trying to do those first two tips. One, do something different than anyone else is doing. And number two, trying to maintain creativity when portraying these kind of scenes that, you know, if you spend much time in the outdoors, we've all seen them. Excuse me. We've all seen this stuff 1,000 times, but trying to figure out ways, being creative and trying to figure out ways of taking what's every day and making it really, taking a picture of it where you're to the point where it really kind of stops people in their tracks and just, you know, kind of makes them say, wow. And again, to me, this was kind of a creative approach to this white-tailed deer picture. This doe was walking down the trail following this buck, and I'd scouted them, and I knew where they were going to be, or I thought I knew where they were going to be, and they ended up coming in one day. And I took plenty of pictures of the buck in the background, but when the doe stopped and then turned around and looked, you know, when I saw it, I thought, that's my shot right there. I really thought that would be a great shot. And of all the pictures I took in this series, this one right here, from the input I get from others, you know, not only Facebook, but also, you know, in the competitive world of professional photography, what the editor's feedback is everybody really likes this shot just because it even though you can see the buck back there and the emphasis is not on the buck, it's really more on the doe and her reaction to the buck following her. So again, it's all about trying to do things different. Number one. The second tip is just trying to maintain a creative edge. And I always like this shot too. And you know, the creativity that this shot took, it took a little bit of craziness and a little bit of creativity, but trying to figure out a way to get a rattlesnake to strike your camera without you know, your eye being behind the camera. And you know, I don't mind telling you what my secret was here. The creative way of doing it was just trying to figure out what tools I needed to do it. What I ended up doing was putting my camera on the end of a monopod and then using the remote control that I've mentioned a couple of times to fire the camera. And then when I found a snake, it was just, from there, it wasn't very creative. It was just putting the camera in the snake's face and seeing how he reacted to it. And it actually struck the lens. I took about three pictures in this burst because they're so fast. And he actually struck the lens. And if you look, I'll show you this pointer here. You can actually see the shadow of my camera right there off to his left side, our right. Hey, Clint, can you hear me?
Yes, just fine.
Okay. Well, I see that people are putting there that they can't hear. I mean, I'm guessing everyone else can hear, though?
I think so. There's some technical issues that we're trying to work through. Okay,
but we're all good?
Yes, sir.
Okay, tip number 3. It's pretty basic, but you'd be surprised at how many people don't even try to do this. You know, when I grew up as a hunter, and I still love to hunt. I don't hunt as much as I used to because now the overwhelming urge for me is if I'm in the field, I can't do both. I can't carry a camera and a gun because it's just too much to mess with. But the overwhelming urge for me is, when I'm out in the field, is I need to be carrying a camera instead of a gun. But I really feel like one of the things that made me a better photographer as I started photography was growing up as a hunter. You know, I started rabbit hunting when I was 7 or 8, rabbit and squirrel hunting in northeast Texas in the woods up there. Started coon hunting with some cousins and their dogs, you know, in my teen years. Used to trap a little bit in the woods there. My brother and I, we used to run a trap line every morning before school. Kind of transition. White-tailed deer are kind of a latecomer to that part of Texas, so I was probably 15 or 16 by the time I started hunting white-tailed deer. But all that hunting experience kind of culminated itself into helping me with photography, because when I photograph and I'm trying to figure out how can I maximize my efforts on taking pictures of wildlife, I kind of default back to my hunting background and trying to figure out where the animals are going to be. And the first thing you got to do is you got to understand wildlife and how and where it's likely to be. and what its habits are. And so I spend a lot of time, you know, if I'm not out taking pictures or trying to take pictures, I've got my binoculars with me, and I'm just trying to be a student of wildlife and trying to figure out where they're moving and using all those tools I can, trying to figure out the weather patterns or scouting preseason for white-tailed deer to figure out where the scrapes are and the rubs are going to be and the travel corridors are and those pinch points. And all those things that hunters do to try to be successful, I try to do the same thing. But again, it all comes back to a basic understanding of wildlife and understanding that when conditions are right, when you're wanting to get that shot, like this shot was really by serendipity. I was working on a book about prairie dogs for Texas Tech University Press and really trying to look for a shot of prairie dogs in the snow and knowing where they would be and kind of understanding their behavior a little bit, knowing that they've still got to get out and forage because prairie dogs don't really hibernate. They've got to get out and forage during the snow. I went out one day and actually saw this right here. And what happened here was burrowing owls will usually inhabit prairie dog burrows once the prairie dogs have abandoned them. And so this shot here was actually prairie dog was on one hole, the burrowing owl was on another hole, and I was taking really pictures of both of them, and a hawk flew over, and it spooked them, and when it spooked the prairie dog, it ran to this hole here. It ducked in first, the owl ducked in second, and then it wasn't just a few seconds later that the owl jumped back out and looked back in the hole like you see right now at the prairie dog, like he's saying, hey, you're in the wrong hole, buddy. And so they stood there for a second, got the shot, and then, you know, the prairie dog crawled out and they went on about their business. But not having an understanding of how the animals were going to behave and where they were likely to be on that day, you know, I never would have got that shot. One of my favorite critters are prairie chickens, and again, just trying to, prairie chickens are neat because they're pretty easy to figure out. You know, in the spring of every year, they'll go back and they'll boom on leks, and those leks are little areas of patches of ground that they fly to every year to do their breeding dance. And it's just pretty easy to figure out where they're at, especially I work with a lot of landowners, and they give me access to their properties, but to figure out where the prairie dogs are, where the prairie chickens are, and then just getting myself in the right position where the light's going to be right to try to get some really dynamic shots. And again, you know, if you're going to species of quail in Texas that aren't widespread like scaled quail, you kind of got to understand where scaled quail are going to be and what they're going to be doing and the time of year they're going to be doing it to try to anticipate to get some behavior shots like this guy's seeing. And same way with horny toads. You know, I love horny toads. I remember growing up, I used to see them around my grandparents' house in the Dallas area, but, you know, as they started disappearing because of a variety of reasons, you know, they become more and more scarce. But, you know, thankfully in Childress County, we have plenty of them. But it's neat to go out and understand where they're going to be and find horny toads in their native habitat and be able to photograph them like this. And again, I know I sound like a broken record, but it's all about understanding behavior. You know, here's a simple behavior that you find that some people don't understand, but ducks are predictable. Ducks and geese are predictable on how they're going to land on water, and they're like commercial airplanes or, you know, or recreational airplanes. It's always best when they land into the wind. And so if you have a wind direction, you can kind of predict the best place to be as long as you know that there's going to be animals there. And I love this shot here just because of how all those ducks kind of lined up on their own, those geese lined up on their own coming in, and it's almost perfectly symmetrical. You know, if I could change it in any way, and if I was a cheater, I could do Photoshop, but I don't really Photoshop that much. But the one way I think it could be better, but in the way it's kind of good like this, but it'd be kind of neat if they would have stacked up on top of themselves and there had been another geese in this spot right here. But when you're working with wildlife, as you guys know, you can't always control that kind of stuff, so you take what you can get. And again, I love wild turkeys. I mean, I could go out and photograph wild turkeys every single day of the year. I love watching those things so much, but just understanding, you know, when they strut, when they gobble, why they gobble, and what you can do to make them gobble. Understanding all those things about a wild turkey really helps us get a shot like this, because even though I didn't know he was going to gobble, I had kind of an idea that he would, and I knew how to make him gobble. So then it was just a matter of him walking into that perfect light, and then me making my secret sound, and then all of a sudden he gobbled on command, and all I had to do then was react. And so even though pictures like this, they don't really seem, they seem like it takes a lot of luck to get. There's a lot more planning than what most might realize that went into a shot like this. And a lot of it's just being prepared. I shot this pictures of red-winged blackbirds a couple of years ago. I knew they'd be migrating, and every year in Childress, just huge flocks of them migrate through. And so I knew they were going to be out on a place south of town, and so I went out there and I was watching them, and just, for no other reason, just for fun, trying to go out. I wasn't any kind of assignment, just wanted to go out and shoot a picture of these guys. And when I shot this first picture, I noticed there was something different about it, and you can kind of see them right in there. It's like almost like a Where's Waldo. You've got all these red-winged blackbirds, and then all of a sudden there's some color that sticks out. And so I thought that was kind of strange, so I kept focusing on them and shot more pictures. And there they are making a big turn, coming back, and you can see them again right there. I remember watching the kids shows on PBS. When I saw this, it made me think about those shows when I was a kid, that one of these things is not like the other, and it's pretty obvious right there. And then I caught him by himself and was able to shoot some pictures. And frankly, I'm not really I'm more of an expert on the birds that you can legally hunt and kill than I am just songbirds, but I like songbirds, and I'll try to take pictures of them when I can. And I took a picture of this guy, not knowing what it was. And throughout my network, I've got some acquaintances who are members of the Audubon Society, and sent them a couple of pictures saying, hey, can y'all help me identify this bird? I've never seen one before, and it was flying with a bunch of red-winged blackbirds. I can't remember the term they used, but anyway, they kind of plugged it in their network. And if I've ever had a blog post go viral, it was this one. And within a couple of days, I had people from all over the world that were interested in a strange-looking bird with the red-winged blackbirds. And what they told me, and again, I'm no expert, so if there's any bird scientists in the group, I apologize for my ignorance in advance. But they told me it was a red-winged blackbird, but it had, or what a couple of scientists told me is a red-winged blackbird that had some kind of, this is an unscientific term, some messed up DNA, and its coloration came out wrong. And they said there was only one other documented one like this that they'd ever documented before, and it was up in South Dakota. And as far as they knew at the time, I was the only person to ever document that coloration on camera, and I was just happened to be there and did it south of Childress, Texas. And also understanding behavior, because I know, barn owls are neat to photograph, and they're really predictable how they fly. And so knowing that, you can go out and you can get pictures like this. I had a friend of mine do this composite for me because I wanted to do a big panoramic print for my office. But this was just a series of shots I took of that barn owl flying, and he stitched them all together for me to make this panoramic, which I thought was kind of cool. When I first got it back, I was kind of enamored with it, and I brought my little boy in. He was probably about 8 at the time. He's 10 now. He's 7 or 8 at the time. And I brought my little boy in and asked him if he had ever seen that flock of owls flying, and he stood there staring at the screen for a long time trying to figure out why all those owls looked the same, but they were flying in a flock together. Again, understanding behavior, you get good. If you understand wildlife, you can get good behavioral shots. To me, it's one thing to take good representative pictures of the species, but man, if you can catch behavior in the shots, that really sets it over the top in my mind. So that's what I really try to strive and get, is just real good behavior shots. Here's a neat shot here, and it's, again, I can't understand why they're there, but I would put the old, or the Childress Airport, and the old runways that used to be on the Air Force Base here, because we had an Air Force Base during World War II here in Childress, and a couple of the runways are no longer in operation. They still use the airport out there as a municipal airport, but a couple of the runways aren't in operation. But I've got access there, and for some reason in the summertime, and I think it must be because there's some irrigated cotton around it, and I think because maybe all the bugs that go to that cotton, it's the world's best place to find nighthawks. and just understanding their behavior and scouting and going out and looking for animals and understanding what they're going to be doing, I wanted to try to build a collection just for a personal project of nighthawk images. So I was out there one day and I found the reason why you don't see very many baby nighthawks is because Mother Nature created, you can see them right there if you haven't spotted them yet, Mother Nature created the perfect camo for those little guys. I mean, it's incredible how much he blends into all the surroundings that are around him. And this is actually the old surface of the runway with weeds growing up through it. And so when I spotted him, I took a wide-angle lens. You know, again, it was that tip number 2, staying creative, and tip number 1, doing things that other people don't do. And so I got really close to him and was able to shoot that picture, kind of a good environmental portrait that shows the grass in the background. You know, I'm glad that doesn't look too much like pavement. It looks more like a kind of a rocky surface of the ground, and then him just laying in there with his eyes closed, enjoying the sun. And there he is from the top view, just shooting another view of him that you haven't seen before. But again, just incredible. I mean, that's what amazes me about nature and wildlife is just how it's adapted to just almost perfect camo. Now, I would say perfect camo, but I was able to spot it. So it's not completely perfect, but it was still close enough. And then as I was taking pictures of that little guy, I looked around and I found Mom sitting on the ground, and she was watching me. And again, different angle. I was laying on the ground like in a prone position, like a sniper might with my telephoto lens when I shot this picture. And that's what attributes for all the out of focus vegetation, which in my opinion, I think makes the picture. I love how it's all kind of soft and dreamy looking around the edges. And, you know, and then the main star of the show, the nighthawk herself, she's in perfectly sharp focus, or at least her eye is. And then after a while, she got up and flew away, and that's one of the shots I got her. She was flying away. And I'll tell you what, of all the shots I've taken, that's really hard to do, because if you've ever seen those guys fly, they are pretty erratic in their flight patterns. And to try to shoot a picture like that, it's pretty tough. And again, if you just understand wildlife, you understand that a possum can hang from its tail, and, you know, I was able to find this possum, and he was trying to crawl away from me when he fell like that. So when he fell, I was ready and shot those pictures. And, you know, a really cool shot of this feral hog with her baby that she's cuddling up next to. Or see, that's the thing. She looks like she's cuddling. What it was is that baby was trying to come in there and eat the corn laying on the ground, and that picture, she looks like she's cuddling, but the very next shot, the little baby pig's up in the air because she nudged it away. And then got these synchronized flyers. These remind me of the Blue Angels, these Mallard Ducks, and the way they're flying. I always point this out to people. Look at this guy. Normal sized duck, but look how big this one is. I mean, that fatty, I don't see how he got off the ground. He's huge. And then I've never seen a stack of bats before, but if I can give you an extra tip today, if you ever see a stack of bats, go ahead and take a picture of it, because you may not see them ever again. These are actually, this is kind of misleading. This is in a cave in Childress, Texas that on a friend of mine's ranch that he showed me, and we were walking through the cave. It was in the wintertime, and I had my flashlight, and I looked up, and that's actually looking up at those bats. There were these stack of bats and all these bat faces. They're all hibernating, looking back at me. So again, it's not every day you see a stack of bats, so that's why I had to photograph them like that. Prairie dogs, you know, a lot of people out in this country don't like prairie dogs. I don't really have anything against them, because it's the best dog I ever had, I think. It'll send my kids to college one day because of that book I did. But I love prairie dogs, love photographing them. They're really a neat animal to watch, because they're really animated, and they do all kinds of different behaviors, and it's just if you can find them and get them acclimated to you, whether it's in a national park somewhere or on private land, they're really a lot of fun to watch. And again, back to turkeys, understanding their behavior. I really wanted this shot for a long time, and it really turned out better than I thought it would. I wanted a shot of a hen in focus, kind of if you think back to the deer picture earlier, kind of that same vein. A hen in focus and a tom out of focus. And what was neat about this shot is how those two toms came in, and they're kind of competing for her attention, which she's not really paying any attention to them. So I love the look on her face. But anyway, that was a nice shot, I thought, right there. And then again, understanding wildlife to the point where you know how to predators like bobcats are going to respond to a call, and how to position yourself to put the odds in your favor that once you start calling, that bobcat's going to come where you want it to come, not coming behind you, but come where you want it to come, and that way you can get a great shot of it. This female cat was actually taken in northeast Texas on our family place, and I shot, she was probably 20 yards from me when I shot this picture. And at first couple of pictures, she didn't know I was there. And then I took the picture again, and she spotted me. I was wearing a ghillie suit, like you see snipers wearing. I was pretty camouflaged, sitting on the ground. So she was at eye level with me. I was pretty camouflaged, but she still knew that something was up. She couldn't really smell me because the wind was in my favor, but she kind of knew something was up. But anyway, got some of the best bobcat pictures I've ever taken before, just by understanding wildlife and putting all the odds in my favor. And then tip number 4, and this is one thing that people overlook a lot, but you know, if time is of the essence for me, and I don't have a lot of time to kill, the one tip I tell people is just hit a dirt road. You know, a lot of pictures I take because I keep my eyes open, drive some dirt roads, and look for wildlife. Like the picture of this mule deer right here, I shot it from out of the window of my pickup, driving down a dirt road on a ranch of a friend of mine that he gave me access to. And again, all these pictures were taken out of the window of my pickup. I've got this bag. It's like a bean bag, and you can use, you know, you can hand make them yourself, but it's like a big bean bag that goes on the windowsill of the open window of my pickup, and that way I can just set it's almost like a shooting bag. If you think of those lead bags like you shoot off of when you're sighting in your rifle, it's just like that except a little bigger. I'll put it on the sill of my of the window of my truck and just drive around like that and shoot pictures out the window. All these. This porcupine was taken out of the window. Here's another kind of crazy colored burrowing owl. I shot this one in Rawls, Texas a couple of years ago. And everywhere where this thing is white, it should be brown, and just a really rare animal like that. But I was just prepared and ready. Good thing to know that quail numbers are coming back strong. I saw 2 cubbies this morning that I flushed wild just driving around, but in the spring. They're pretty predictable, and a lot of times those male bob whites will go back to the same post or in the same area to call from, and like clockwork, I could go this place every morning on this dirt road by my house and be able to photograph him. But 10 yards away, right out of the window of my pickup, just super easy, but it's all about finding a dirt road and hitting those dirt roads and driving around. And I think this was if I remember right, this story was in Texas Wildlife not too long ago, and these are actually swift foxes. You know, I think up to the late 90s that biologists thought these guys were extinct in Texas. And on one day, driving down a dirt road near Dalhart, Texas, me and a buddy, we found 6 of them, and we were able to call them up to the edge of the truck to photograph them. And that's just one of many photographs I got. Picture of a coyote howling, same way, driving around. Actually saw him hanging out on the side of the road, and he kept howling, and I took a lot of pictures of him, and I thought there was something up with him, but then I kind of figured it all out. What it was during their breeding season, and there was a female that you couldn't see eating on something just right past this berm over in the ditch, and he kept challenge howling all the other coyotes you could hear around. But I guess she was in heat and didn't want to leave her side and made himself an easy target if I'd have been shooting with a rifle. But, you know, thankfully, had my camera, was able to shoot a lot of really good pictures of that coyote howling. And again, I really like trying to get shots of animal behavior. I shot a picture of this porcupine driving down the road. He's walking down the side of the road, so I just get out and walk past him. Because porcupines, if you've ever seen them, they don't move very fast. So I walked past him, laid on the road, and he kept walking towards me, and I was able to get that eye-level shot at him as he's walking towards me. And that's that same bull elk I showed you a while ago that was laying in the grass. Little chipmunk. And I like that because that shows you deer actually do pay attention to the road signs. And then the last tip is build a network. You know, sometimes I take for granted living in the country and always living in rural Texas that everybody can get access to finding wildlife and photographing wildlife. But a lot of times when I speak in more urban areas, that that's one of the big hurdles that urban photographers have, is they just don't have access to any land to go take pictures of, so they end up going to the city park or to whatever wildlife refuge may be the closest. And I work some on wildlife refuges, but most of my pictures I take on private land. And part of that is building a network, and really building a network, number one, where you have access to places like the place in the country where I live on. It's not a lot of land, but I've got access to all the land that touches mine. So in essence, in a practical manner, I've got I live in the middle of about 7,000 acres that I can access all the land around me. So I've got lots of places to shoot there close, but it's all about building relationships and getting people's trust and giving them prints when you take pictures of something cool like this bobcat. I actually took this picture about a half a mile from my house on the neighbor's land, called this big male bobcat in. And one of the first things I did when I shot that picture is I had a print made. You can get prints made in an hour at Walmart. Sent it to Walmart from my computer at home, went to town later that day, picked up the print, took it by and gave it to him. And, it just ensures that he was proud of it, loved the picture. It just ensured that I'm going to still have access to that property. So that's what I mean about building a network. But part of building a network is also having eyes and ears in the field for you, because, I can't be everywhere all the time. And so I rely on people that will tell me, and this one guy would tell me in the pasture by his house that all these toms would congregate every day. So I came out here one day and set up in a blind, and all these jakes came out, and this tom came out, and a turkey fight ensued, and was able to get some really nice shots of the turkey fight. But I love, if you look at these two guys fighting, I love all their body language that's around them, like that dude there and that one there. It's hilarious to see the body language that they have. Badgers are really hard to photograph, but I had a guy tell me he kept seeing a badger on his property, and I went out there 2 or 3 times, and I finally found the guy. It's not the angle I wanted, because I was actually shooting out of my pickup when I saw it, because you can see the downward angle, but still, it's just a neat opportunity to get. And this is kind of TWA specific. I think about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, they asked me to do a story about the dunes sagebrush lizard and the impact that those being listed as a threatened species might have on oil and gas production in the Permian Basin of Texas. And, first of all, I'd never seen a dune sagebrush lizard before, and so I didn't know what they looked like. And secondly, even if I knew what they looked like, if you've ever been to the Permian Basin, to the sand hills where these lizards live, I mean, you're looking at this picture here, it's tens of thousands of acres of this, so how am I ever going to find one? Because, I don't have a lot of time to spend on some of these articles, that they're pretty quick turnaround when they get assigned, that when you need to get them back. And since geography is so far, it's not like you're working with unlimited budgets either. So trying to be efficient, getting pictures of the lizards and trying to figure out where they live, that was a real challenge. So again, on building that network, tapping into my network and starting to ask questions, trying to figure out, I actually found this guy who's a researcher. He was doing research with Texas A&M University on these lizards, and just trying to figure out if they were even there, and if they were there, how they could go about counting them. And he would catch lizards every day in a bucket. He had built these traps, and the lizards would fall in the traps, and he would try to tag them and monitor their existence out there. And so just by tapping into my network, I was able to get with him, spent half a day with him, checking traps, shooting pictures of lizards, and was able to really get some shots that I think I'm pretty proud of, and was able to really take some good representative shots of that lizard that to me, not only the words help tell the story, but the pictures help tell the story as well. And I think I'll run past this because I don't want to sound like a commercial, but that's my last slide right there, and I think we're right on time. If you ever want to contact me, and believe me, I always answer email. So there's my email address, russell@russellgraves.com. That's my web address there. Or if you follow me on Facebook, I'm not always the best at posting pictures on Facebook all the time because I get pretty busy, and I've got a couple of young kids who are in all kinds of sports, and so that's kind of my first priority. So I try to take pictures and go hang out with my wife and kids and do family stuff. And so, but I always check email. If you're ever having questions or want to, passing through town and want to say hi, contact me. I'd always love to visit with people. So, Clint, is now the question and answer time?
Now's the question and answer time. Appreciate all the good info.
Did you see the time when I wrapped it up?
What's that?
Did you see the time?
Right on time.
Okay. You mean just read them off the screen and answer them?
Either way, I can read them off to you. Just a reminder to everybody, we still have sometimes, so if you have some more questions as Russell answers these, please feel free to type them up and we'll get to those. The first one is, would you be willing to share the presentation with the participants as a PDF?
Yes.
Okay.
What would be the best way to do that?
We can post it on the TWA website as a resource. Let me go into the TWA page and I'll grab a link to where that will be and share it with everybody, and then you can go back tomorrow, the next day, and we'll make sure to get it posted up there.
Okay.
The next one that came in is, we have a yearbook class that's tuning in, and they're wondering if there's any way to find out the camera settings for your pictures or some of your pictures that were presented today.
I can tell you, I mean, yeah, if you picked a specific picture, I could go back and look at the settings on the EXIF info of each individual picture. But really, in general, it's all about the same. So I could, you know, if there's a picture in particular, I could probably tell you pretty close how it was shot. Because one thing you learn is what works, and after a while, it just kind of becomes automatic. Most all the pictures I've taken are within a pretty small window of settings. So, you know, again, if there's anything in particular, I could probably tell you what it is, or at least get it really, really close.
Okay. For those that ask that question, if there's anything in particular, let me know, or just type it up there and we'll go back to it and address that in particular. The last question that came in is, what camera and lenses do you shoot with?
I use Canon cameras, and you know, the lenses just depends on what I'm shooting. Like this picture of the lizard here, I shot it with a 70 to 200 millimeter zoom lens with extension tubes on it, and what extension tubes are, it just makes that lens where it'll focus a little closer. And then, you know, like for example, this shot, I'd used a 15 millimeter fisheye lens. The same with that one, 15 millimeter fisheye. But shots like that, I've got a 500 millimeter telephoto that I use. That was shot with a 500 millimeter telephoto. And so it's really whatever, you know, those lenses are like tools. It's whatever the proper tool for the job is and whatever I'm trying to shoot a picture of. And I see a question that came across on the bottom here that Ruth Hoyt asked, what was your previous slide coming soon? And I'll just say what that is. I'm working on, it's a soft launch now, and you can go look at it, but I'm working on a forum where people can share pictures. Texas Nature Photographer, you know, hopefully be able to get online, share pictures with one another, kind of a social network. But I mean, if you've been on the internet long enough, you know what forums are. And I'm also working on a brand new book. It's going to be for the iPad and Kindle, and it's 35 Ways to Become a Better Nature Photographer. So it's going to be a lot of what you saw today, in addition to a lot of videos, kind of behind the scenes stuff, really kind of an interactive book that breaks stuff down and help people learn to be a better photographer. And this wildlife ranch I'm talking about, I am in the process of developing my property where people can come out and shoot pictures. I've got a lot of questions rolling in on the bottom here. Can you just go through and answer these?
Sure. If you would read them out, Russell, just so we have a record of what the question was.
I can. Gary Buckwalter asked, what are the speed of my lenses? It just, if I'm understanding the question correctly, I guess he's asking what the maximum speed is. Like this 70 to 200 I shot this with, it's an f2.8 wide open. You know, like the 15 millimeter, I think it's an f3.5. The 500 millimeter, it's an f4 lens wide open. And so it just, most of these are all shot with the 500 millimeter lens, because that's kind of my go-to lens when I'm driving around that I keep on the pickup beside me. But if you get into here and you see pictures like those bats, that was actually taken with a 16 to 35 millimeter zoom, because I was just a foot away from those. That was, you know, that's an f2.8 lens. So I think that's your question that you're asking, Gary. Ruth, thanks for the comment. She said she loved my work, and thanks for sharing with us. And then Alan Hansen asked, do you camo your camera and tripod? The tripods are not camouflaged. They're just, I've got black carbon fiber tripods, so they're you know, to me, they're kind of camouflaged already, and the heads are all black, so there's not a lot of shiny stuff on them really to contend with. The camera lenses I have a 500 millimeter lens and a 300 millimeter lens, and I have what's called, it's a product called lens coat on them, and it's just like a neoprene covering you can put on those lenses. Those lenses are white, so I think they need a little bit of camouflage, but if you just had black or just something to knock down the white, it would suffice. But I put those lens coats on those lenses as much just to protect the lenses as I do to camouflage them. And then Justin, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Justin. He says, Russell, thanks for the presentation. What are your thoughts on doublers, or a lot of people call doublers like a converter? I have a 300 millimeter telephoto lens, but I've noticed that I could use a little more zoom and don't want to spend a fortune on a big lens. My thoughts are kind of varied on that, Justin. You know, whenever you put one of those 2x or 1.4x extenders on a lens, it degrades the image quality somewhat. On my Canon lenses and in my Canon extenders that I have, you can't really notice it all that much on a 1.4, but on a 2x, it really affects the image quality noticeably, and it also affects the autofocus speed and the accuracy of autofocus on that. So it has some effect on it. I'm not anti 2x, but you know, my thought always is I've got to figure out a way to get closer to those animals instead of just trying to use a lens, because one of the things you get into if you use too much magnification is the air you're shooting through becomes unsharp. If you're shooting through too much air, there's no such thing as dirt being in the air or smog or humidity or any of those things. Over distance, it affects the image quality. That's why stuff when you see in the distance, it all looks hazy. And so I try to limit how much space is between me and that animal all the time and really try to do the best I can like that. If I have to use a 1.4x, I've got it and I can use it, but I try to avoid them whenever I can, just because to me it's more important to get closer to the animals. Gary Buckwalter asked, do I ever make blind submissions or do I just respond to assignments? Most of my work right now comes in the form of assignments, Gary. And, you know, in the beginning when I first got started, it was all blind submissions because, you know, I really didn't have a body to work to go off of, and I had no reputation within the marketplace, and so people really didn't know who I was or what I could do. But as time has went on, I don't do as many blind submissions anymore. It's all usually people kind of come to me and ask for me to shoot something specifically, or looking back in my library of stock images, which after shooting for 25 years like I've been doing, you know, I've got probably 400,000 images on file. So if someone needs a picture of something like a stack of bats, you know, they'll ask me, do you have a picture of a stack of bats? And I can go look through my archive and find what they need. So that's usually the way it works a lot of times. And then Gary asked again, do I use any filters? No, I don't use any filters at all. Every now and then, if the sky's kind of washed out in post-processing, I use Lightroom to manage all my image collection. I will add a little bit of color or maybe underexpose the sky a little bit via a mask. But as far as putting any filters on my lenses, I don't use any filters. Ruth gives a good tip here. She says she uses the leg of an old pair of camo sweatpants to cover her lens up. So yeah, that's a good tip there. And then Gary asked again, the importance of a full frame sensor or the number of pixels in the sensor. The importance of the full frame, you know, I don't know that that's so important for me anyway. I know there's a lot of disagreement in that. I think a full, you know, I've got 3 cameras I shoot. I've got one that's a full frame sensor, which is a Canon 5D Mark II, and that camera is great for a specific use. I've got another camera that's a Canon 1D Mark IV, and that camera is not a full frame sensor. It's a 1.3 crop sensor, and that camera is good for a specific use. And then I've got a Canon 60D with a 1.6 crop, and that camera is good for specific use. And really for me, the camera with the 1.3 crop, that's the one I use to shoot most of the wildlife because it's got a fast frame rate and it's got a really fast autofocus. And so I prefer to use that one when I'm shooting pictures of wildlife. The 60D I use when I need it to get in kind of weird spots because it's a small camera and it's got a movable LCD so I can put it really low or really high and be able to see what I'm composing. And the 5D Mark II I use a lot for when stuff is moving kind of slower. I use that for a lot of my commercial work. The number of pixels in sensors, you know, I think the pixel wars are kind of over now. Just, you know, I've got an iPhone in my pocket. I shot an assignment with an iPhone a couple of years ago for a magazine, and they didn't even know it was iPhone photos because they were so good. So I think the pixel wars are over now in terms of cameras. So I think any camera you buy these days, no matter how many megapixels it has on the sensor, it's probably going to be a good camera. And then Ruth says, do you use Lightroom and Photoshop? I rarely use Photoshop, Ruth. About the only time I use Photoshop is if I'm trying to do a panoramic, stitching a panoramic together, because Photoshop does a pretty good job of automating that process for me. But 99% of the time, I use Lightroom to manage all my images. Ruth also gave a good tip. The sweatpants keeps your hands warm in the cold weather too. That's a good point because it was in the 20s this morning in Childress, and my hands are still trying to warm up from holding my cameras this morning. And then Gary asked, I lose track of digital files. How do you keep so many organized? Man, Gary, that's a good presentation for another day. I've got a pretty slick system that I use that I have shared with people in seminars, and not paid seminars. I'm not trying to sound like a commercial, but it's a long topic. It takes about an hour to go through because there's some nuance to it, and pretty much it's I could help you out if you just contact me offline, but I don't know how much time we've got to get into it, but I've got a system of how I organize it all the way from when I get the pictures in front of my computer and ingest them into the computer, and there's a streamlined workflow that I go through to keep everything organized, and I can usually find most of what I'm looking for within a matter of a few seconds. And then I think that's all the questions. Thank you for what you said at the end, Gary. You said wonderful presentation and wonderful answers to questions. Thank you, and you're welcome for that. And are there any more questions? Did anyone have any specific pictures they were wanting the information from?
Yeah, we had a couple, Russell, in the chat window. The specific one was the two turkeys fighting. Some specific info on that picture.
Let me find it. I think it's this way. Let me look. Yeah, because I think that was in the building network part. And I'll just kind of break down. Okay, here's the challenge of this picture here. You've got a really light background and then a really dark, I mean, you got a really light foreground with that grass. And this is actually kind of the edge of this guy's yard where he mowed. So that's why the grass is so short. And I asked him not to mow it because it's buffalo grass, so it's pretty short anyway, but he mowed it, so that's why it's so manicured looking. So you've got a really light background, and you've got a really dark background, and you've got turkeys who have a mixture of light and dark in them. So really the challenge is finding what the middle tone is there. And one tip I give everybody, because cameras, as smart as they are these days, they still can't figure out scenes like this. If I would have left it up to the camera, this is all manually dialed in. If I would have left it up to the camera would have exposed this and tried to make everything neutral toned. And in that case, the background would have been too light, the foreground would have been blown out bright, and the turkeys would have lost detail in them because they'd have been overexposed. And that, you know, I know that's because it would have tried to make the background, it would try to lighten the background up. So what I had to do is find something to middle tone. And one tip I give everybody, the northern blue sky is almost exactly mid-tone. And so if I've got a tricky exposure like this I'm trying to figure out, the first thing I'll do is point my camera maybe 15 or 20 degrees above the northern horizon and point it at the blue sky. And whatever my camera tells me that it ought to be set on, the aperture and shutter speed combo, based on the ISO I have the camera set, it's going to be almost 100% right 100% of the time. So again, I'll point my camera 15, 20 degrees above the horizon at the northern blue sky, dial in what it says there, and then no matter what the camera, because all of a sudden when you manually dial in that exposure setting and then you point your camera back at a tricky scene like this, the camera's going to tell you, hey, this is all exposed wrong, but you got to just trust, well, you know what you're doing more than the camera, because the camera can't think. You can think, but the camera can't. And so with all that in mind, this was shot, and this is a guess because I don't have the excess info, but I almost always shoot the same. This was shot at ISO 100. I would put money on it. And it was shot with a 500 millimeter lens at f5.6 to get a little bit of depth of field, and it was probably 1/500th of a second that I shot that at, because it was early in the morning, so you're not going to have quite as much light at play. So 1/500th of a second, maybe 1/1000th of a second at f5.6 at ISO 100.
Okay. The next question's a little bit lengthy, but bear with me. I have a 100 to 400 Canon 4 to 5.6 lens that I'm thinking of purchasing a 70 to 200 IS2 2.8. I'm mostly interested in birds on the lake we live on and ducks on the river, but can't afford a 500 mil right now. Would this addition help me in the way I think, especially the 2.8?
Can you repeat that question? Let me make sure I'm understanding it correctly before I answer.
Okay. This person has a 100 to 400 4 to 5.6 lens, and she's thinking of purchasing a 70 to 200 2.8 lens. Mostly interested in birds on the lake, ducks on the river, can't afford a 500 mil right now. Would this addition help me in the way I think, especially at the 2.8?
Oh, the 2.8 won't help as much as, if I'm understanding the question correctly, she's going to get a 70 to 200 millimeter lens?
That's the way I interpret it, yes.
Okay. If she's trying to get closer to the ducks, that won't get her closer optically than what the lens she already has is. So, you know, really the 2.8 part, that's just the aperture and what is, you know, the widest it's capable of opening. The smaller the number, they're like shotgun gauges. The smaller the number, the bigger the opening. And so that just, the 2.8, all it does is kind of give you an indication of how much light it'll let in. So the bigger the number, the more light, the more that lens can handle in low light situations. So really for her on ducks on the lake and birds around the lake, that 1 to 400 would probably be her way to go. And, you know, look, those 500 millimeter lenses, I can't even afford it. You know, if I didn't do it professionally, I probably wouldn't own one because they're really, really expensive. But there's other ways other than just thinking I can get a giant lens to solve all my problems. And part of it is, you know, some of the things we talked about, like understanding wildlife and just learning how to get close to it and understanding how they respond to things like feeding them and getting them in close and just trying to outthink them a little bit, you know, solves a lot of problems that, you know, it's not always just throwing money at the problem. So it sounds to me like she has a pretty good kit already with what she's got. And
okay.
Gary asked a question here, do I use spot exposure setting or multi-spot? I usually use evaluative metering that the Canon has. I know different companies call it different things, but Canon has spot metering, average metering, and evaluative metering, and I usually have it set on evaluative. And then Ruth says, many folks are getting the Tamron. This may be a good tip for the last question you asked, Clint. Many folks are getting the Tamron 150 to 500 millimeter. Several of my students have them, and they are sharp. Or no, she says 1 to 600 millimeter. I don't have any experience with that lens, but I've used Tamron lenses in the past, and they've always been pretty good lenses. So that'd be interesting to see other people's experience with that lens.
Okay, I think we have, we'll take one more and then we'll shut it down.
Yeah, and let me reiterate, Clint, if anybody has any questions, just feel free to reach out to me at russell@russellgraves.com, and I promise that I'll always respond.
Okay, I appreciate that. Last one, what is the minimum megapixels one should look for in a new camera?
Well, and I kind of answered that earlier a little bit. You know, I'm not a very smart person overall. I used to write a column for a magazine on photography, not digital photography. And the first column I ever wrote for that magazine is called Why Film Rules. And I laid out my argument for why film is the medium of choice for serious photographers to come. And less than a year later, I owned my first digital camera and was putting up all my film cameras for sale. And back then, the first camera that Canon loaned me a camera then, it was a Canon 10D. And that thing had like 6.3 megapixels. And this is probably, I'm guessing 2004, 2005, somewhere right in there. And so I took the camera out, tried it out, thought, you know, it's kind of cool that you can take pictures and see them right away. I mean, it's pretty awesome. And so I thought, but the real test is going to be getting a print made. So I mentioned Walmart before. I'm not a spokesperson for Walmart, but, you know, when you live in Childress, it's not like you have high-end photo labs on every corner. So if you want to get prints made pretty quick, Walmart's your place. And so I ordered a poster print from Walmart and made it 20 by 30. And I took that digital file, 6.3 megapixels, took that digital file and had it immaculate. You know, and that's a camera that was made 10 years ago. Looked immaculate. And from that point on, I knew that it's time for the film cameras to go, because if digital cameras can do this good, then there's no point in me shooting film anymore. So my point is, if you buy a camera made in the past, if it's a digital SLR that's been made in the past 4 or 5 years, even if it's a used camera, and I'm an advocate of buying used cameras because I buy them all the time, buy used equipment all the time, but even if you buy a used camera that's 4 or 5 years old, really forget about the megapixels, because it really doesn't matter in the end. Just about any new modern camera, digital SLR, is going to have the images it's capable of making is going to be good quality. And I say that, and I don't mean to be harsh when I say this, but I'm kind of a cooking nerd. I really like watching Food Network, and I like some of those celebrity chefs. And Bobby Flay is an awesome barbecue chef, not because of the grill he owns, because he's perfected the craft. And that's the same way with photography. You can talk cameras all day, and you can say, this camera is better than that camera, but really the cameras are just like a hammer in someone's hand. I just built a new house not long ago, and the crews that I hired to build my house, it's not like I was going out there saying, man, you have got an awesome hammer. Where did you get that thing from? Because I know if I get a hammer like that, I can do the same kind of work. So really, in the end, the cameras are just the tools. You buy a good tool to start with, it'll give you good results if you know how to use it. And so really the most important thing is just getting out, learning how to operate the camera, understanding what the controls do and how to manipulate them, and then just perfecting the craft, or however much you want to perfect it. And that's where you're going to get your best results, is just learning the craft and using cameras as a tool, and just accepting what they can do and what their limitations are, and understanding that most of the heavy lifting you've got to do with your brain and with your fingers. Make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. That's an excellent